The first FNaF interactive novel, excluding VIP, is now out. It came out almost 4 months ago, and it is called The Week Before. It's essentially the story of a security guard that worked at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza a week before the first FNaF game. The interactive novel seemed to be the next big series of FNaF books like the Fazbear Frights and Tales from the Pizzaplex books were, though this time only having 4 books, but with those other books, I did summaries on them. However, with interactive novels, it's kinda hard to make a summary video because there's multiple different stories, and I'd like to contain this in one video, which is hard to do. So instead of a full detailed summary, this video will be all about the interesting details I noticed throughout the book, similar to what I did with some Fazbear Frights and Tales stories. However, if you do miss my summaries of FNaF stories, don't worry, as I have one more summary that I still plan on doing. Although I'm very late, I want to do a summary in the near future, or maybe not near future, but in the future at some point, on Monster, the exclusive story in the Haps and Somnophobia combo book, which came out back in July. I've heard the story is bad, but I still want to read it and do a summary, so I will soon. So if you're interested in seeing that, subscribe and stay tuned. I know I'm also really late for this book. I don't really have a good excuse outside of just school existing and me not having the energy to read, so that's why I'm over 2 months late for this video. So let's not get any later and let's just get started talking about the week before. Number 1. As I said, the book follows a night security guard on his last week working at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza as the night guard. Because this book takes place the week before the first FNaF game, we know that the protagonist is Phone Guy. The book even claims at a certain point that people call him the Phone Guy, since he often leaves messages on the phone for employees. Because the book is a second-person perspective where you are the Phone Guy, we of course are given Phone Guy's actual canon name, which is Ralph. This should go without saying, but this also debunks the theory of Fritz Smith being Phone Guy completely. Not that the theory ever made sense considering Phone Guy claimed he'd take the night shift when the restaurant opened again, and Fritz worked there when it hadn't opened yet, but still I thought I should mention that. I should also say that throughout this video, I'll be saying what page the stuff I talk about can be found on. Since this is a choose your own adventure book, it's a bit hard to explain all the context, so I'm labeling the pages so if you have the book, you can fact check the stuff I'm saying yourself, plus it makes it easier for me in the editing process to go back and take pictures of each page. Speaking of which, page 2 also gives us a bit of information about Phone Guy, including the fact that he has an 11-year-old daughter named Capelia. Number 2. Page 2 talks a bit about Freddy and how he looks dapper in his black top hat and bow tie. Ralph is apparently glad that they had returned this vintage animatronic to his classic look. This tells us something that was already kind of clear since FNaF 2, but that was still sometimes a bit debated. Firstly, it tells us that the classic animatronics are repaired versions of the withered animatronics, fixed up and redesigned, but meant to keep the same general look they originally had at the first Freddy's. It also may be alluding to the toy animatronic, since prior to this Freddy's location opening, Freddy had been replaced by Toy Freddy, who strayed a bit farther away from the original Freddy design. Not sure if it's referencing that, but it might be. Number 3. Page 14 provides us some insight into the bite of 87. It was believed that the victim of the bite had somehow provoked the animatronic who did it, though they probably didn't actually, and only believed that because they didn't think there would be another reason for the animatronic to attack somebody. It also stated that the bite of 87 victim cannot speak or do much of anything, which isn't a huge deal, but it's definitely interesting to know, and it would make it difficult if Jeremy Fitzgerald was the victim for him to also be Cassie's dad and the Help Wanted 2 player, which some people have suggested, unless he made a miraculous recovery. What's also interesting to note is that the missing children incident was only a rumor at the time. In the later games, as more time passes since the incident, it makes sense for it to devolve into rumors. But it's interesting to note that they were only rumors even after the missing children incident had just happened. While these rumors were a big factor in why Freddy's lost popularity, it is said that the bite of 87 is what really made it much worse, which isn't super surprising, but good to know. Number 4. It is said on page 13 that the wiring in the Freddy's building is ancient, which is likely why the cameras glitch and the monitors in the office overload all the time. He also says that might be why the animatronics act weird. This is likely a reference to how the FNaF 1 Freddy's building and the first Freddy's are the same building. We know this because in FNaF 3 it is stated that the safe rooms are shutting down after the first Freddy's, which is why there isn't one in FNaF 2. And yet, the FNaF 3 minigames show that there is a safe room in the FNaF 1 location. This explains why the wiring is considered ancient, because it wasn't updated even years after the first Freddy's. Number 5. Something else to note about Ralph is that he doesn't know why the animatronics act weird. As I said, he knows they do, but he suspects that it's because of the old technology being finicky. He believes that the concern about them is unreasonable. Phone Guy knows the animatronics move, but he doesn't know they're possessed and thinks the concern is unreasonable, like I just said. It's not really that surprising that he wouldn't know they're possessed, but it's also just interesting to note that he doesn't. Number 6. A common debate is whether or not the FNaF 1 location is open during the events of FNaF 1, and this book actually answers that question for us. Freddy's is in fact open during FNaF 1. Ralph makes a few references to the currently open Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. He talks about how it's not performing the greatest right now, and how the next day kids would be there dirtying up the bathrooms. That means that when Phone Guy works at Freddy's, it is still open. Some would argue that Phone Guy's calls are actually from a long time ago, but there's a problem with that. This book is literally called The Week Before, and it takes place the week before FNaF 1. It's extremely unlikely that Freddy shut down in the week after Ralph died, especially when you consider that the FNaF 1 newspapers claim the restaurant will close by the end of the year, and the paycheck claims the game to be in the first half of November, so if the restaurant is still open the week before the game, it would also still be open during the game. Number 7. On page 20, Ralph is working in the bathroom, inspecting a sink when Foxy rushes in. Ralph looks at Foxy up close, noting how seeing Foxy usually thrilled Ralph and how he used to stop in and see him every day at the end of his shift. Right before Foxy kills Ralph, he remarks that Foxy was his favorite, and also says this a couple times throughout the book. This is something that was established in FNaF 2, where Phone Guy there remarks that Foxy is his favorite of the animatronics. Number 8. Speaking of Foxy, as I just said, Ralph says that he used to visit Foxy at the end of every shift. However, it is stated that he used to do that until they closed Pirate's Cove and labeled it out of order. This is a very important detail, because this tells us that Pirate's Cove was shut down during the lifespan of either the first Freddy's or the FNaF 1 location. I'll talk a bit later about the Bite of 87 theories from this book, but whether Foxy did the Bite of 87 or not, it doesn't make sense that he is out of order because of that, since he was either out of order before the Bite of 87 even happened, or he was still being used at the FNaF 1 location even after the Bite of 87, and just went out of order for a bit longer into the FNaF 1 location's lifespan. Doesn't mean that Foxy can't have done the Bite of 87, it just means him being out of order probably doesn't have anything to do with that. Number 9. On page 25, Ralph is hiding in a bathroom stall from Foxy, and he's holding the door shut. Foxy is looking around the bathroom as Ralph's hold on the stall door is causing it to slightly rattle. The sound normally wouldn't be audible, but it was for Foxy as his ears worked impeccably. In his mind, Ralph jokes, "My, what large ears you have," a reference to Little Red Riding Hood. Now, I don't know if this is intentional, but this, funnily enough, reminds me of the FNaF AR skin Big Bad Foxy, a play on the Big Bad Wolf from Little Red Riding Hood. And the skin also turns into the grandma disguise, in which the wolf would be told, "What large ears you have." I don't know if this is a reference to the FNaF AR skin, or just a joke because wolves and foxes are similar, but either way, it just reminded me of that. Number 10. Pages 32 and 34 both have some interesting stuff. First, page 32 references Bonnie's human-like groaning from FNaF 1, which continues throughout the book. The art of him on the page also has a top row of teeth, which is inaccurate but forgivable. On page 35, Ralph tries to slip past Bonnie but fails and gets grabbed, then dragged across the dining room and into backstage. In backstage, Bonnie grabs a supposed yellow spare Freddy costume, which we know of course is a Golden Freddy suit, and Ralph acknowledges that Bonnie wants to stuff him into the suit even though there's no way he can fit in there along with the motors and servos, and he probably won't survive, which is what Phone Guy says on night 1 of FNaF 1, how there's a lot of crossbeams and wires and animatronic devices and getting stuffed would kill you. Number 11. On page 34, Ralph finds Bonnie right outside the bathroom door, and Bonnie sees him, so Ralph slams the door on him and waits. Interestingly, Bonnie does not come into the bathroom. This might be because Bonnie in FNaF 1 doesn't go to the bathrooms, primarily sticking to the left side of the building. To be fair, Foxy did come into the bathroom and he's also only on the left in FNaF 1, but he might act a bit differently since he runs around at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Unclear though. Number 12. This isn't a huge surprise since FNaF 1 is widely believed to either be in 1992 or 1993, but it's mentioned on page 232 that Capelia, Ralph's daughter, has a Sega Genesis, which came out in 1989, placing FNaF 1 in a year past 1989, or in 1989. Number 13. On page 60, Ralph steps out into the West Hall, and he looks at the corner where the Freddy poster is that normally says "Let's Party" and shows Freddy singing. This is what we see in the game. However, when he looks at the poster now, he swears it has changed to show Freddy ripping off his own head, an Easter egg that sometimes happens in the game when you look at the camera, but when Ralph looks back, the poster is back to normal. Number 14. On page 84, Ralph steps out of the party room to find Chica's cupcake prop on the ground. It's noted that his name is Mr. Cupcake, but some of the staff had different names for him. This is likely a reference to the fact that a common nickname for the cupcake is Carl, something that was also referenced in the FNaF movie where the character named Carl was killed by the cupcake. Speaking of the cupcake killing people in the FNaF movie, we're shown that it has very sharp teeth and a moving mouth. This is also shown on the same page where Ralph realizes that the cupcake is an animatronic and holds it to his ear and hears servos. Then its mouth opens, revealing teeth that bite down on Ralph and kill him. Number 15. On page 80, we have 3 options at the end. One to hide inside Party Room 1, which I just explained one of the outcomes for, a second one to use the ID card if you have it, and a third to use the Master Key. However, when you flip to page 83 to use the Master Key, you're in for a surprise. See, there is no Master Key in this book, and now this punishes you for cheating. Ralph sees a note pinned to a Freddy Fazbear poster marked "Let's Party, You Ready?" You as in the letter U. This is very similar to a poster we can see in FNaF 2 that has Toy Freddy on it and says "Party Time, You Ready?" My guess is that Fazbear Entertainment just had a classic Freddy version of that poster and slightly changed the wording since it said that this is Freddy Fazbear and not Toy Freddy. Moving farther down the page though, we get to read the message that is on the note that was attached to the poster. The message is spelled with letters cut out of a newspaper and says, "A master key is not in this game. You are the one who must live, ? With your shame." You know what they say, cheaters don't win, but those who might try make the purple man grin. Then it tells you on what page each night begins, and then it says the game has crashed. This is interesting. It's cool that it kind of punishes you for cheating, and the reference to William Afton is interesting. It claims that the people who try to cheat make the purple man grin, which implies that William Afton smiles when people try to cheat. This makes me wonder if maybe one of the missing kids had cheated at playing an arcade game before Afton killed them or something. Could be a stretch, but Chica did enter this room right before we find this note, and Susie died right after playing Fruity Maze, so maybe she somehow cheated at the game before Afton killed her. Also, mentioning the purple man grinning reminds me a lot of the FNaF 2 Foxy Go 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 minigame, where Purple Guy is seen smiling right before we find the dead kids. Overall, interesting page, but not sure if it's just a punishment or if it actually has lore meaning. Number 16. On page 67, Ralph gets a phone call from his boss, telling him that they had their biggest crowd yet, meaning Freddy's was now getting popular again, which indicates it's growing more successful again and could be the location hand unit was referring to in Sister Location. However, because Ralph had only used his fingers to tighten the screws on Bonnie's head, it had fallen off again, and landed in a kid's birthday cake, and what looked like blood had also come out of him since the animatronics hadn't been cleaned even though the bodies seemed to have been removed. Although, despite the bodies likely being removed by then, Ralph notes on page 63, as well as a couple other times throughout the book, that there looks to be human teeth in his head. I have a feeling that's more of a spiritual thing though, since Bonnie didn't even have a face in FNaF 2, yet there was no body inside him, meaning they had already been removed. But not yet cleaned, which is why the blood is still there. Weird that it hadn't dried though. Regardless, Ralph then gets fired because they checked the camera footage and saw that Ralph had sabotaged the animatronics. Essentially, he was fired for tampering with the animatronics, just like we are in the games. Number 17. On page 72, Ralph puts on a Freddy mask to try and hide from Foxy. However, Foxy takes a second to look at you and can see Ralph through the mask. This is a reference to FNaF 2, where Foxy is not fooled by the mask, likely because, as in this book, he can simply see through it. Right after this, Ralph blacks out and awakens to realize he was stuffed inside an animatronic suit, and he hopes someone checks the suits back here once in a while and finds your body so your daughter will know why you never came home. This is a reference to Phone Guy's death call on night 4 of FNaF 1, where he tells us to check inside the suits in the back room, and then he'll try to hold out until someone checks. Another thing referenced from FNaF 2 is how to actually defend against Foxy, flashing your light at him, and on page 71, Ralph picks up the flashlight and he shines it in Foxy's eyes and he stops moving completely, allowing Ralph to slip by. Number 18. Ralph's daughter Coppelia is 11 years old, and when Ralph is standing in her doorway, she claims it was kinda creepy because he reminded her of that Fredbear thing from his job, to which Ralph corrected her and said it was Freddy Fazbear. Interesting that she said Fredbear. It's also said that she doesn't like the animatronics and that they creep her out. Ralph had brought her to work once when she was 7, and the animatronics freaked her out then. Because she's now 11, she would have been 7 4 years ago, and the FNaF 1 location wasn't open until this year in the book. That means she had to have either visited the first Freddy's or the FNaF 2 location. If this book, and by extension FNaF 1, took place in 1989, the earliest it can be, she would have been to the first Freddy's in 1985 before it closed, the location that also still had Golden Freddy and Spring Bonnie, so that could be why she said Fredbear. If not, the story and FNaF 1 must be in 1991, and she must have visited in 1987 for FNaF 2. By that logic, maybe she was at his work on the day Ralph was talking on the phone about Fredbear's Family Diner, which would explain the mix-up there. This book is giving a good amount of insight into FNaF 1, and I like how it narrows down the year that it might be, either being 1989 or 1991. We are also constantly reminded that Ralph is not used to working the night shift, indicating that he only recently started working it. In FNaF 2, he says when the restaurant opens again, he'll probably take the night shift himself, and it's also indicated that Freddy's only recently reopened. This indicates that despite at minimum 2 years passing since FNaF 2, since the Sega Genesis is out, the FNaF AR Faz facts are inaccurate, which was already kinda clear, and that FNaF 1 was not open for numerous years. Instead, it was seemingly only open for less than 1 year, opening the same year that it closed. What year is that? Well, it's commonly believed to have been 1992 or 1993, but I don't think that can be the case anymore. I think because of the mention of the Sega Genesis, the game probably takes place the year that it came out, it being mentioned as a way of telling us the actual year. Honestly, I assume the days of the week for the games are just irrelevant. I considered using this to make another video, one going over all the evidence for when FNaF 1 takes place and to suggest that it most likely is in 1989, but then I found a video by a YouTuber named The Unwithered Truth, which basically took the evidence I wanted to talk about and more, so I deemed it unnecessary. I recommend going and watching that video if you haven't yet, but one thing that's really notable is the fact that there's a lot of pop culture references, but none of those references go past the year 1989, so that's likely the year that the book takes place. Number 19. On page 90, Ralph notes that there's more children's drawings on the walls, but these ones were creepier, showing images of children with fat teardrops falling from their eyes, and some with X's for eyes. This, of course, is referencing the missing children. X's for eyes is common in drawings to show that someone is dead, and the teardrops is a reference to the minigames where we're commonly shown crying children who are the missing kids, especially the FNaF 3 minigames with the original missing kids whom we give cake to. Number 20. On page 96, among others, we get to Party Room 2, and the window is broken and there is blood on the floor. It's a mess. That's why we're here, to clean it up. We get more insight on this later. Ralph assumes there was an intruder. However, the blood on the floor wasn't there before. What this tells us is that the intruder was killed by the animatronics. This also happens in the FNaF movie, where people break into Freddy's and the animatronics kill them off. The pool of blood would have been from the intruder that had died. It's not that mind-blowing, and again it's confirmed later on. I just wanted to mention it because of the FNaF movie connection, whether it's intentional or not. Number 21. On page 106, Ralph leaves out the window, abandoning his post. Days go by and 4 kids go missing, kids that live in a line leading from Freddy's to Ralph's house. It's game over as Ralph has to protect Capelia from the animatronics who are trying to break in and get her. What's interesting here is that it's only the kids going missing, not any adults, even though the animatronics usually kill kids because they were killed by one and don't trust them. However, they do kidnap kids in the books because they want more friends. It's a bit weird though that they avoid getting the adults. It reminds me in a way of Midnight Motorist, where an animatronic goes to someone's window and lures them away. I personally believe that the animatronic was Shadow Freddy, but who knows, it may have actually been an escaped animatronic from Fredbear's. Number 22. On page 119, Ralph distracts Chica in the kitchen by lighting a cupcake. Something causes him to begin singing happy birthday to her, which you would think would give away his location, but it doesn't. When he gets to the name part, he says happy birthday dear Susie, and Chica gets upset. This is interesting, as it indicates that Gabriel is not the only missing child that died at their birthday. The community always associates the missing children as being friends with each other who died together, but the FNaF 1 newspapers actually imply that they died separately, like in the novels, despite them actually dying together in the movies and the Into the Pit memory. Number 23. On page 122, it is said that the breaker room for the restaurant is behind the show stage. Keep in mind that the first Freddy's and the FNaF 1 location are the same building, and Into the Pit takes place in that building as well. In the Into the Pit game, the breaker room, or at least a room with a switch for the power to the restaurant, actually is behind the stage. Also, on page 125, Ralph is beginning to get lost in the vents, finding numerous dead ends, and wondering if it's because parts of the building have been shut down and blocked off over the years. This may be a reference to the fact that Into the Pit shows a bunch of areas in Freddy's that we don't see in FNaF 1, but that's unclear as I'm not sure the Into the Pit game does align completely with FNaF 1 regardless, but it is interesting that the breaker room is in the same spot in both. Number 24. One question a lot of people have been asking after this book is whether or not Foxy caused the bite of 87. On page 18, Ralph comments that he doesn't look like he is for kids, which is probably why he's marked out of order. But the book also says, though as far as you know, he's never bitten any kids. The question is that just saying that despite not biting kids, he very well may bite Ralph? Or is it trying to say that Foxy has bitten adults? Later on page 166, it said that people suggested shining lights in the animatronic's eyes if they attacked again, indicating the animatronic that did the bite was vulnerable to lights, which Foxy is in FNaF 2 and in this book. However, the lights do not work on Chica at all. So does that indicate that it's only a thing with Foxy, thus making him the culprit of the bite? Well, no, for a few reasons. First of all, on page 177, Ralph uses the light on Bonnie and it works perfectly. On top of that, in FNaF 2, you actually can't shine your light on Chica except through cameras. She doesn't show up in the hall, and when she's in the vent, she just goes straight into the office, not visible in the vent itself. So technically, we don't have evidence that Chica would be stopped by lights in the first place. Bonnie does though, so it's not exclusive to Foxy. Phone Guy in FNaF 2 also says that lights in the animatronic's eyes make Foxy glitch out, but that this glitch may have also carried over to the newer models, the toys. With Foxy, it's necessary because he doesn't get fooled by the mask, but the toy animatronics do get stalled by lights. Plus, it makes more sense for a toy animatronic to do the bite regardless. As I said earlier, Foxy couldn't have been out of order because of the bite because he was placed out of order during Freddy's 1 or Freddy's 3, and the bite happened at Freddy's 2, so that's not great evidence that it was him. Also, the withered animatronics were not performing in FNaF 2, so they wouldn't have actually had access to even bite the patrons. The toy animatronics were decommissioned after FNaF 2 because of supposed glitches, but the OG animatronics stayed, indicating the toys caused the bite, or else they would have been the ones that were kept, and the withereds would have been the ones that were scrapped. So overall, did Foxy do the bite of 87? I doubt it. Number 25. This is the detail that I was waiting to get to. It's one of the most talked about things in the entire book, if not the most talked about thing. The bite of 83. Throughout the book, there's a few references here and there to the bite of 83. On page 62, Ralph gets on the show stage and thinks about how the staff and customers aren't allowed up here. Quote, "The last time a kid found his way on stage during a performance, you shudder. That's what liability waivers are for." Then, on page 154, Ralph remarks that the animatronics will probably be low on power tomorrow. However, quote, "But even if they freeze up on stage, it will be far from the worst thing that has happened during a performance. By a long shot." So, we know Ralph has knowledge of the bite of 83, but just how much does he know? Fast forward, page 195. 4 years before the bite of 87, there had been an incident known as the Big Bite, until the bite of 87 happened, which he compares to how World War I was called the Great War until World War II happened. The Big Bite happened in 1983, so Ralph punches in those numbers into the phone hoping for it to be the passcode for him to be able to use it. I think we should just read the rest of the page from here. Quote, "You punch in the numbers 1983 and the phone line crackles. Then you hear, 'A sobbing child?' There's definitely a little boy crying on the other end of the line. He's shouting, 'No, let me go!' You lean forward. 'Hello? Hello? Are you there? Talk to me, kid!' 'No, please, I don't want to go!' Your skin prickles. You realize you're listening to a recording. You can't help anyone. 'Give you a closer look,' the boy says, his voice mean and hard. You hear children's laughter and bubbly pop music, one of Fredbear's original hits, The Secret Ingredient Is You, which you haven't heard in years. 'Hey, stop that! Put him down!' a man shouts. 'Get back from the stage! Do not touch the bear!' People start shouting and screaming. The music plays on. The boy cries on until crunch! You hang up the phone, but you can still hear a child crying. You twist around in your seat and see crunch! Game over. So, first of all, we have absolutely definitive, undeniable confirmations that literally cannot be argued against no matter how hard people try. The FNaF 4 minigames were in 1983. We know this, but some people even today don't believe so. But now there's absolutely zero way that you can deny it. It's also confirmed here that FNaF 4 is Fredbear's and not the first Freddy's location, since the song playing is a song from Fredbear's. Pretty clear already, but still. Now, we are hearing an audio recording of the bite victim being killed. The dialogue isn't entirely one-to-one with the Night 5 minigame of FNaF 4, but still, neither is Into the Pit with the missing children incident, so it doesn't really matter, it's a memory, not the actual thing. Phone Guy is straight up hearing the bite of 83 though. What's important to note though, is that Golden Freddy exists at the first Freddy's location. Freddy's and Fredbear's are either both open simultaneously, or the Fredbear's animatronics were decommissioned and new ones were made for Freddy's. Regardless, while it's different in the books, in the games, Golden Freddy is the animatronic from Freddy's, not the one from Fredbear's. So how is the memory of the bite of 83 here with Golden Freddy if it's not the animatronic that did the bite of 83? Well, Ralph still hears the bite victim crying after the phone call ends. That means that the kid is here with him. This makes it crystal clear. No matter what, the bite victim, in some way, undeniably possesses Golden Freddy. If you want to know my thoughts on who the bite victim is, check out my most recent theory video. Anyway, this one page is just a big lore dump, and I love it. Number 26. On the very next page, 196, Ralph instead types in 1987 in the phone. Then he types it backwards and a recording starts playing, a recording Ralph had made a while ago. This is actually the Night 5 phone call from FNaF 2, which takes place in 1987. That's why 1987 is the passcode. It's not hard to figure out if you read the book, but I just wanted to mention it just in case there's people watching who haven't read the book. Number 27. On page 197, Ralph uses the Fredbear's Family Diner ticket he found earlier, punching the numbers 2014-2014 into the phone because those numbers are on the ticket. Disregarding the fact that 2014 is the year FNaF 1 came out and this book takes place a week before FNaF 1, this code plays a recording from a woman named Bronwyn Light, who Ralph had interviewed for a summer job at Freddy's, but she didn't get hired. She then became a reporter and started investigating Freddy's, finding that the animatronics had been diverting power to their charging platform so they can charge up more and leave the building. She had broken in a few nights ago to try and stop it, but Jeremy got her. She quickly corrects herself and says Bonnie got her. Jeremy is the spirit possessing Bonnie, as we know from FNaF 6's Lorekeeper ending, so this is the second time a missing child's name has been mentioned in the book. But this also explains whose blood was in Party Room 2 a couple nights prior. Bronwyn had broken in, Bonnie killed her, and now her spirit was in the restaurant sending Ralph this message. Number 28. On page 241, Ralph has finished his fifth and final night. He wakes up at home at 11 AM with Capelia playing a game on her Sega Genesis. Apparently, this is a game with a high score, and Ralph distracted her and causes her to lose it. It's noted that Ralph hears a digitized crashing sound and sees a purple car crashing into a pink car on the screen. Capelia is actually playing Midnight Motorist, the actual arcade game in FNaF 6, not the lore part that's off the beaten path. Number 29. The animatronics in this book apparently want to escape Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and go out into the real world, essentially because they are bored. In Sister Location, the Funtime animatronics, which I should remind you are also possessed by the missing kids, just like these classic animatronics are, do essentially the same thing, escape from their confinement. Number 30. On page 220, Golden Freddy appears in the shadows behind the stage. He has no eyes, but Ralph knows he is looking at him. Ralph stares at Golden Freddy and he doesn't move. He doesn't look away, even as the animatronics walk up on stage and eventually begin to die. When Ralph eventually does look at the animatronics, he quickly looks back and Golden Freddy suddenly appears right in front of him. Golden Freddy has his mouth open and screams, holding both sides of Ralph's head with his hands. Ralph hears the words, "It's me," over and over, but suddenly a soft female voice whispers saying the words, "It's me. Thank you. You did it. She'll be alright now. She's safe. She's safe." This is the voice of Bronwyn telling him that he was successful in stopping the animatronics and that now Capelia would be safe from them. However, what's interesting is the question of where the voice is coming from. Immediately, I thought it was coming from Golden Freddy, and that Bronwyn had been possessing him. She had been seen previously dead and stuffed inside an old Fredbear's era designed Freddy animatronic, so was that Golden Freddy? It's unclear, since Ralph doesn't specify when Golden Freddy appears that it's the same animatronic that Bronwyn was in, so I think she was likely stuffed into another animatronic, just a spare Freddy, especially since there's another ending I'll talk about in a second, where Ralph is also stuffed into a Freddy suit, yet Bronwyn is not in that one, so they're likely just stuffed into extra Freddy suits that are separate from the Golden Freddy that we know. Also, Bronwyn killing Ralph wouldn't really make sense, but it would make sense if Golden Freddy was killing him, and Bronwyn was telling him that his daughter was safe, so it would be okay if he did die. But it doesn't make sense that Bronwyn would intentionally kill him. Number 31. When I first started reading this book, I was worried that despite Ralph being phone guy, we might never actually get him recording the FNaF 1 phone calls. But with the bonus item existing, and with me catching a couple glimpses at adjacent pages, I found that we actually do, and I got to read them in full when I went back through the book after getting that bonus item, the mobile phone. On page 45, we get our first instance of this. Ralph realizes it's kind of bittersweet that he's retiring and decides to record a message for the next person on the job, and what he says at the beginning of the call perfectly aligns with what he says in FNaF 1's first phone call. It doesn't tell us every little thing he says, but it tells us the beginning of the FNaF 1 phone call, and paraphrases what he ends up saying after that, which also aligns with what he says in the phone call in the game. The Night 2 phone call is recorded on page 77. While dialogue from the Night 3 phone call isn't shown in the book, page 103 does tell us Ralph would record it while talking about how people don't usually last this long and probably won't hear the call regardless, which is what Phone Guy himself says on Night 3's phone call. The Night 4 phone call is a bit more interesting though. We all know that Phone Guy dies on Night 4 of FNaF 1, but there's 5 nights in this book, or rather 6 if you choose to do overtime. So I was expecting that the canon ending of the book would just happen on Night 4, and Nights 5 and 6 wouldn't be canon. Night 6 still isn't canon, but instead of making Night 5 non-canon, Ralph simply does not leave a message on his Night 4. Our Night 4 phone call is just recorded on Ralph's Night 5, which Ralph acknowledges himself. Number 32. Speaking of Phone Guy's final moments, I would like to fully admit that I was, in fact, wrong. I made a YouTube short a while ago talking about who I think killed Phone Guy, saying I think it has to either be Chica or Golden Freddy. The banging on the door seems to be Foxy, meaning the left door is closed, ruling out both Foxy and Bonnie since they only come from the left. Freddy's music is playing, which only happens when he's in the kitchen or when the power runs out, which obviously can't be the case since the door is closed. And you hear the groan of Chica and Bonnie, but since it can't be Bonnie, it must be Chica. But we also hear the jump scare scream of Golden Freddy, so it probably was him. However, a lot of people in the comments said that he got ambushed and that he was killed by all of them. I would always say that it was very obvious he got ambushed, but that I doubted that they literally all killed him at once. However, this book confirms that I was wrong. He quite literally did get killed by all of them at once. The banging was not from Foxy, it was from Chica and Bonnie on each door. Both doors were closed, and Foxy was actually in the office and currently out of commission. In this book, Freddy's music plays wherever he goes, not just in the kitchen and not just when the power runs out, and he was actually behind Ralph in the vent, which isn't part of the FNaF 1 gameplay as it's blocked off. The animatronics had been getting more aggressive during the call because they were agitated at him recording the call in the first place. Ralph also remarks that the animatronics were getting more aggressive recently and might not even let the next security guard leave the office in order to check inside the suits in the back room, which is scarily accurate, as in FNaF 1 we literally just stay in the office. Ralph in this book goes around doing a bunch of maintenance stuff, but in FNaF 1, Mike just sits in the office and doesn't do anything of the sort. The Golden Freddy jumpscare scream from the call actually isn't Golden Freddy, it's just all 4 of the main animatronics screaming at once, both doors opening at the same time and all the animatronics rushing in, and the phone call cuts off after the screams like it does in the game. After Ralph dies, he finds himself possessing an animatronic in the repair shop behind the stage, likely an old spare. Number 33. Throughout the book, Dave the maintenance guy is mentioned a few times. Ralph calls Dave a few times for assistance when you use the bonus phone, and he's a bit of a bitter person at times. Dave is the fake name that William Afton uses in the Silver Eyes when he becomes a Freddy security guard, and in FNaF 2, Purple Guy has a badge indicating that he also became a security guard, and so he likely used the fake name Dave once again. Phone Guy explains that the previous guy ended up switching to the day shift, and that apparently that position became available. However, it was actually never stated that the guard had gotten fired. It's entirely possible that Afton, using the name Dave, was actually still working at Freddy's after that, not working as a guard anymore, and switching to a maintenance position. That's why his day guard job became available. Plus, Dave interacts with Ralph a few times, so it's possible he sends Mike to be the guard because he knows Ralph is leaving the job. It would actually make a decent amount of sense, not to mention he's the maintenance guy and apparently knows pretty much everything about the animatronics, which would make sense in the case of Afton, since while Henry was the one to make them, Afton was still the Freddy's co-founder and used the animatronics, so he likely had to figure out how they worked. Number 34. Throughout the book, especially with the use of the bonus item, Ralph calls different areas of the building, like the backstage area or the security office, to cause the phones to ring in those areas, making noise and luring the animatronics around the building. This is something that we do constantly and almost exclusively in FNaF 3 to keep Springtrap at bay. We play Balloon Boy's sounds, one of which is childlike laughter, to lure Springtrap. On page 137, Ralph knows the animatronics won't hear the phone in the office, so he calls the dining room, Pirate Cove, and then the security office to lure them slowly, which is an important thing to do in FNaF 3 as Springtrap can't hear the audio if it's in a room that isn't connected to the one that he's in. On another page where Ralph does this, page 101, Ralph calls backstage to lure the animatronics there, but shockingly, someone picks up the phone. All that can be heard from the other end is children's laughter. I don't really think those two things are related, I just kind of made the connection. But then the line goes dead, and the screen of Ralph's phone lights up with the message, "Saved them," which is a minigame from FNaF 2 that is about the children Afton kills in the second Freddy's location, so it's interesting that it pops up here. What I wonder is whether this message is actually related to the toys somehow, which seems unlikely, or if it's Bronwyn sending Ralph a message to save the missing kids by keeping them in Freddy's, or if it means something completely different. Regardless, these things relate to FNAF 3 and 2 respectively, so I thought they'd be interesting to bring up here. But that's everything, all 11 pages of Google Doc worth of things that I noticed in FNAF's first interactive novel the week before. Well, at least the book labeled as number 1. I still haven't read VIP, the free novel that came out during the 10th anniversary week, so maybe I'll read that and do a video on it in the future, even though I'm late, because when is being late to read a book ever stopped me from making a video on it? I mean, I still plan on making videos on both Monster and the FNAF movie novel, and I'm very late for both of them, especially the FNAF movie novel, which came out over a year ago now, and I also made a video about the Security Breach Files book a year after it came out. Regardless, I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to. There's a couple things I talked about in this video that I might expand on in a future mini theory or even full-length theory, so stay tuned for that as well as any other videos I'll be sending your way in the future. But with all that being said, I'll see you all in the next video. Bye guys!